Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this because we're going to move rapidly past this title to confront something deeply, deeply personal. We're looking at that terrifying, completely visceral moment of looking at someone you love and having to say, I just cannot do this.
So we're talking about the sheer, paralyzing panic that washes over you the exact second you even attempt to draw a line. You know the feeling, right? Your throat tightens up, your heart absolutely races, the instinct to just retreat, to back down is completely overwhelming. And, well, why is that? Because in that exact fraction of a second, this crushing psychological illusion just entirely takes over your brain. It tells you that asserting your own perfectly normal limits makes you a cruel, ungrateful, cold-hearted monster. We so often confuse setting a healthy limit with actively rejecting a human being. But the reality is entirely different. We aren't rejecting the person at all. Actually, scratch that. What we're really doing is rejecting a specific dynamic, or maybe an overwhelming request that we literally just do not have the resources to fulfill. Yet the panic feels absolute. It feels like life or death. So let's really look at exactly what feeds that psychological terror.
When you set a boundary, this massive illusion of cruelty takes over. Let's just pause here and compassionately unpack these specific fears, because they are heavy. This whole thing is fueled by a deep, almost evolutionary fear of abandonment. The brain says, if I say no, will I be cast out? Am I going to lose this connection that I so desperately need? And that thought process generates this crushing, highly punitive guilt. You literally feel as though you are actively causing harm to someone you care deeply about. And I really want to take a second to validate that intense relational anxiety right now. It is completely normal to feel this way. It really is. Because, society, and honestly, sometimes our own family upbringing, has conditioned us to believe that unlimited, absolute availability is the only true measure of love. So the moment you reach your limit, your brain completely misfires. It screams at you, telling you that your own basic self-preservation is somehow an act of destruction. But I promise you it isn't.
Now, to truly understand why we feel this crushing guilt, we have to look closely at the relationship systems we actually come from. Think of a highly enmeshed family. In psychology, we call this fusion. And I want you to imagine it not as a group of separate individuals, but as a single, incredibly powerful emotional organism. Inside this organism, there is this profound, undeniable emotional pull to just merge into a single unit. Implicitly, you are being asked to give up your own separate identity just to maintain family harmony and approval. The entire system relies totally on your compliance for its day-to-day stability. So think about what happens if you change your shape. If you dare to put up a boundary, the whole organism feels that shift, and it completely panics. And the things to remember here is, they aren't trying to be malicious. They really aren't. They are simply trying to survive the only way they know how to survive.
And inside an enmeshed system, there's always this reciprocal dance of overfunctioning and underfunctioning. It's like a seesaw. The overfunctioner steps up, taking control, basically managing everyone else's anxiety by doing everything for them. Meanwhile, the underfunctioner yields their own self to be managed by others. Now, when these systems get stressed out, they desperately demand an equilibrium, a balancing out. So imagine you've always been the one absorbing the anxiety, right? You've always been the dependable one, the rock. And then, out of nowhere, you suddenly say, no. The system does not register that as a healthy, mature personal choice. No way. It registers it as a direct, hostile attack on its incredibly fragile equilibrium. This is why enmeshed systems purposefully, though, often totally unconsciously, mischaracterize your healthy boundaries as acts of abandonment or betrayal. To them, your no literally feels like a threat to their very survival.
So to break free from this terrifying cycle, we must completely, fundamentally redefine what a boundary actually is. I want you to imagine a real-world invisible property line, a line that maps out the exact terms of where you end and where someone else begins. This line isn't a weapon, it's not a punishment, it is simply a definition. A boundary defines you. It clearly shows what is me and what is not me. When you finally have this clear property line of the soul, you know exactly what you are genuinely responsible for. Without it? Well, without it, you're just wandering endlessly all over everyone else's property, constantly tending to their emotional gardens while your own completely withers and dies. Let me see this clearly. You are not responsible for the emotional weather of the entire neighborhood. You're just not.
Building on that, in psychology, we make a really profound distinction when it comes to responsibility. It's the critical difference between carrying a daily load and carrying a boulder. Let me explain. A daily load is your own stuff. It's your own feelings, your own attitudes, your own behaviors. We are each entirely responsible for carrying our own knapsack, our daily load. But a boulder A boulder is a massive, overwhelming crisis. It's an immense emotional weight. Now here's the key. We are responsible to others, meaning we can absolutely offer love and support when they're facing a boulder, but we are not responsible for them. You physically and emotionally cannot carry their boulder for them. If you try, it's going to crush both of you, and the relationship will ultimately just collapse under that crushing weight. When we confuse our daily load with someone else's boulder, we either leave people in pain or we enable their irresponsibility by taking on these massive weights we were simply never meant to carry.
And if we don't figure this out, if we live without these property lines, we step onto a very, very dangerous path. We call it the trajectory of boundarylessness, and it always starts with passive compliance. You know the drill. You say yes when your entire body is screaming no just to keep the peace. But listen to me, that compliance is absolutely not free. It comes at a heavy cost. It inevitably breathes silent resentment. You begin to quietly, secretly resent the very people you are desperately trying to love. And over time, that resentment ferments. It turns into unresolved reactivity. Suddenly, every single small request from them feels like this monumental, suffocating demand. And finally, to escape that intense pressure, you hit the final tragic stage, emotional cutoff. You completely sever the relationship because you literally, physically cannot breathe within it anymore. This right here is exactly why boundarylessness actually destroys the very connection it was trying to save.
Let's dive deeper into emotional cutoff because this is a heavily misunderstood concept. Cutoff, well, it looks like independence, doesn't it? From the outside, it looks like freedom, but it is profoundly misunderstood. Emotional cutoff is actually the act of severing relationship ties as a desperate, highly intense reaction to fusion and unresolved anxiety. It masquerades as true independence, but honestly, it is pure, unfiltered reactivity. Think about it. You aren't separating because you're in a healthy, whole place. You are running away because the emotional enmeshment is just too excruciating to navigate. So you isolate yourself. You completely cut off the resources, the shared history, and even the love of that system. You essentially become an island, but it's an island built entirely on avoidance, not on true psychological strength. Cutting someone off doesn't actually resolve the underlying anxiety, it just freezes it perfectly in place, waiting to be repeated in your very next relationship.
So if cutoff isn't the answer, what is? Well, the true opposite of cutoff isn't compliance. It's a concept called differentiation of self. And this is the sophisticated, highly mature sociological ability to define your own principles, to firmly hold your own ground, while simultaneously staying intimately, deeply connected to the group. It means you can actually sit down at the family dinner table, totally disagree with the prevailing family opinion, and you don't lose your temper. You don't reflexively apologize for your own existence, and you don't storm out of the room. You can be fully you while still being with them. This is essentially the ultimate goal of emotional maturity. It's the ability to stand incredibly firm in your own unique identity without ever needing to sever the relationship just to prove that you exist.
This brings us back to what boundaries actually look like in practice. Healthy boundaries are not thick, impenetrable brick walls. They are fences with gates. Fences mark the property line, sure, but the gate? The gate is absolutely the most important feature. The gate gives you the ultimate power of choice. You can consciously open it to let the good in, the love, the support, the genuine nourishing connection. And just as importantly, you can close it to keep the bad out, the manipulation, the abuse, or frankly, just the exhausting, draining demands of someone else's totally unmanaged anxiety. See, a brick wall keeps literally everything out, which just leaves you starving for human connection. But a property with absolutely no fence, that just lets everything in, leaving you completely trampled. A fence with a sturdy gate allows you to purposefully manage that flow, ensuring that love can actually thrive, and thrive safely.
Which brings us to the crown jewel insight of this entire explainer, a paradigm shift that absolutely changes everything. Listen to this closely. A boundary does not say, "I don't care about you." It says, "I cannot abandon myself to keep this connection." I'm going to say that again because it's so critical. A boundary says, "I cannot abandon myself to keep this connection." When you finally set a limit with someone you love, you are absolutely not rejecting them. What you are actually doing is the incredibly brave, necessary, and deeply painful work of mapping out the exact terms under which you can safely stay in that relationship. You are looking them in the eye and telling them, "I want to be here with you, I really do. But to stay here without building a mountain of silent resentment, to stay here and truly, genuinely love you, I need this space. I need this limit." When you view it that way, a boundary isn't a rejection at all. It is literally the highest form of relational commitment. And that brings us to a final, truly provocative thought that I want to leave you with today. What relationships could you save if you finally dared to define your property lines? Just really think about that for a second. If healthy boundaries are the very tools that preserve connection rather than severing it, then avoiding boundaries is what truly, profoundly risks the relationship.
By bravely holding your ground, you give the people you love the truest, most authentic version of yourself. And in doing so, you give the relationship a foundation that is actually strong enough to last. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive explainer. I really hope this shifts how you see things. Now go out there, start building those fences, open those gates, and save the connections that matter the absolute most.